Kiera Williams adjusted her glasses, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror hanging above her dresser. The dress she'd spent weeks saving for gleamed under the soft light of her bedroom lamp. It was a deep emerald green, flowing like liquid silk and hugging her slender figure in all the right places. She couldn't help but smile, just a little. It wasn't often that she let herself feel this kind of joy. But tonight, she had earned it. The school dance was supposed to be a celebration. After months of hard work, late nights, and endless studying, Kiera had been recognized as one of the top students in her class. Just last week, she had stood on the auditorium stage, a plaque in her hand, as the principal himself congratulated her for her award-winning project on African American history. A shining example of academic excellence, he'd called her. She'd felt proud in that moment, even as she noticed Principal Calloway's forced smile, the one that never quite reached his cold, steely eyes. "This is going to be the best night of our lives, Kiera." Jasmine's voice rang out from the other side of the room, startled Kiera out of her thoughts. Jasmine was sprawled across Kiera's bed, scrolling through her phone with excitement. As Kiera's best friend since the second grade, Jasmine had been her rock through everything. Mean classmates, exhausting exams, and the countless microaggressions that came with being one of the few black students at Lincoln High. Jasmine sat up suddenly, her curls bouncing as she grinned. "You seriously look like a queen. That dress is going to blow everyone away. I'm talking jaws on the floor." Kiera laughed, shaking her head. "You think so? I was starting to wonder if it was too much." "Girl, please. You look perfect and you earned this. After all the crap we've been through at that school, tonight is about celebrating you." Kiera nodded, her smile fading slightly. Lincoln High was one of those schools where everything seemed fine on the surface, but if you looked deeper, you'd see the cracks. The whispers in the hallways, the snide comments from certain teachers, the way her classmates' eyes would glaze over whenever she brought up issues of race in class discussions. It all added up. Still, Kiera had worked hard to make her mark. She had hoped that maybe just for one night she could feel like she belonged. But deep down, there was a nagging feeling she couldn't quite shake. Something about Principal Calloway's disapproving gaze during the awards ceremony had unsettled her. It wasn't the first time she'd felt his scrutiny, but it had seemed sharper, more deliberate. She hadn't dwelled on it at the time, brushing it off as her imagination. Now, though, she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Kiera's worst fears were confirmed. She had arrived at school early, excited to pick up her dance ticket from the front office. But the receptionist, Mrs. Lane, a woman who always wore a tight smile that never quite felt genuine, stopped her with a raised hand. "I'm sorry, Kiera," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Principal Calloway has decided you're ineligible to attend the dance." Kiera froze. "What? Why?" Mrs. Lane pursed her lips, glancing at something on her desk. "I'm afraid there's been a dress code violation." Kiera blinked, stunned. "Dress code violation? The dance hasn't even happened yet. How could I?" "I don't have the details, dear," Mrs. Lane interrupted, clearly eager to end the conversation. "But the principal's decision is final." The words hit Kiera like a punch to the gut. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger as students passing by began to whisper. Jasmine, who had been waiting nearby, stormed over, her eyes blazing. "This is ridiculous. She hasn't even worn the dress yet. How can you ban her for something that hasn't even happened?" Jasmine demanded. Mrs. Lane shrugged, clearly uninterested in their protests. "Take it up with the principal," she said before turning her attention to the next student in line. Kiera stood frozen, her mind racing. This wasn't about the dress. It couldn't be. She had followed every rule, done everything right. So why did it feel like the rules were being bent just for her? Kiera sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, her hands trembling as she stared at her reflection. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the tiny, sterile room. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her chest felt tight, constricted by the weight of humiliation and confusion. "They can't do this to you," Jasmine said fiercely, pacing back and forth across the tiled floor. Her voice echoed off the walls, sharp and angry. "This is total crap, Kiera. You didn't even break any rules. What dress code violation are they even talking about?" Kiera shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know." The words felt hollow, empty. She had spent the past 15 minutes replaying the conversation with Mrs. Lane in her mind, searching for any clue, any justification for what had just happened. But no matter how she turned it over, it didn't make sense. I mean, come on, Jasmine continued, her voice rising. You've seen half the dresses those girls wore to last year's dance. If there's a dress code, no one's following it. And don't even get me started on... Jasmine stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing. Kiera looked up at her friend, confused. What? I just thought of something, Jasmine said slowly. What about Haley? Kiera frowned. Haley? Yeah, Haley Green. She's wearing that red dress. You know, the one with the slit up to here. Jasmine gestured dramatically at her thigh. She's been posting pictures of it all over Instagram for the past week. If they're going to ban anyone for a dress code violation, it should be her, right? Kiera felt a flicker of hope. Jasmine was right. If Haley, one of the most popular girls in school, was allowed to attend the dance in a dress that clearly pushed the boundaries, then surely this whole thing was just some kind of mix-up. We should check, Kiera said, standing up suddenly. We should find out if she got her ticket. 5 minutes later, they found Haley in the cafeteria, surrounded by her usual entourage of equally polished, perfectly coiffed friends. She was laughing loudly, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder as she showed off something on her phone. Excuse me, Kiera said, stepping forward hesitantly. Haley looked up, her smile faltering slightly as her eyes landed on Kiera. Hi? Hey, Kiera said, swallowing her nerves. I heard you're wearing that red dress to the dance. It looks great, by the way. Haley blinked, clearly surprised. Oh, thanks. I was just wondering, Kiera continued, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. Did you have any issues getting your ticket? Like, with the dress code or anything? Haley frowned. Dress code? No, why would I? She reached into her bag and pulled out a shiny black ticket, holding it up as if to prove her point. I got mine last week. Kiera's stomach sank. That's weird. Jasmine cut in, her tone sharp. Kiera got told she couldn't go because of a dress code violation. But your dress has a slit and is backless, so... Haley raised an eyebrow, clearly offended. What are you saying? That I shouldn't go? No, Kiera said quickly, stepping between them. That's not what we're saying, it's just... Never mind. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding. Jasmine followed, muttering angrily under her breath. This is so messed up, Jasmine said once they were back in the hallway. They're targeting you, Kiera. This isn't about the dress, it's about you. Kiera didn't respond. Deep down, she knew Jasmine was right. This wasn't the first time she had felt singled out at Lincoln High. There was that time last year when her science teacher accused her of cheating on a test, even though she had the highest grade in the class, and the time she was called to the office for being disruptive, even though all she had done was ask a question about a lesson. But this felt different, more deliberate. Later that afternoon, Kiera decided to confront Principal Calloway directly. She walked into his office, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. He was sitting behind his desk, typing something on his computer. When he saw her, he frowned. Miss Williams, he said, leaning back in his chair. What can I do for you? I want to talk about the dance, Kiera said, trying to keep her voice calm. I don't understand why I've been banned. I followed all the rules, my dress. This isn't up for discussion, Calloway interrupted, his tone cold. The decision has been made. But why? Kiera pressed. What did I do wrong? Calloway's expression darkened. I don't have to explain myself to you, Miss Williams. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Kiera opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't just disinterest. It was something deeper, something colder. She walked out of the office feeling more defeated than ever. Jasmine slammed her notebook shut, her frustration echoing through the quiet library. I'm telling you, Kiera, there's something bigger going on here. You don't just ban someone from a dance because of a dress they haven't even worn yet. Kiera glanced up from her laptop, where she had been scrolling through the school's online handbook for any mention of the dress code. So far, she had found nothing that explained her exclusion, or why Haley's far more revealing dress had been deemed acceptable. I know, Kiera said softly, her voice heavy with exhaustion. She hadn't slept much the night before, her thoughts consumed by Calloway's cold dismissal. But what are we supposed to do? It's not like he's going to tell us the truth. Jasmine leaned forward, her brown eyes blazing with determination. Then we find the truth ourselves. Look, we already know this isn't about the dress, it's about you. And if Calloway's targeting you, there's probably a reason. Kiera hesitated. She wanted answers just as much as Jasmine did, but part of her was scared of what they might find. Still, the thought of letting Calloway win, of letting him make her feel small and powerless, was unbearable. "Okay," she said finally. "Where do we start?" Jasmine grinned. "Leave it to me." The next day, Jasmine arrived at Kiera's house with a stack of old yearbooks and a triumphant look on her face. "You're not going to believe this," she said, dropping the books onto Kiera's kitchen table. "What is all this?" Kiera asked, flipping through one of the dusty volumes. "Evidence," Jasmine replied. "I went to the library and pulled every yearbook from the past 20 years. And guess what I found? A pattern." Kiera raised an eyebrow. "A pattern?" "Yeah, look at this." Jasmine opened one of the books to a page marked with a sticky note. It was a group photo of the student council from 10 years ago. "See anything weird?" Jasmine asked. Kiera studied the photo. At first glance, it seemed normal. Smiling students lined up in neatly pressed suits and dresses. But then she noticed something. "There's not a single black student," she said slowly. "Exactly," Jasmine said. "Now look at this one." She flipped to another yearbook. This one from 5 years ago. It was another group photo, this time of the National Honor Society. Again, there were no black students. Kiera frowned. "So what? Lincoln's always been a majority white school. That doesn't mean—" "Hold on, I'm not done," Jasmine interrupted, pulling out a third yearbook. She opened it to a page featuring a list of disciplinary actions from that year. Kiera scanned the names, her stomach sinking as she noticed something alarming. Nearly all of the students listed were black. "See what I mean?" Jasmine said, her voice low. "It's not just that black students aren't in the clubs or on the councils. They're being punished more too. Suspended. Expelled. It's like they're being pushed out." Kiera felt a chill run down her spine. She closed the yearbook and looked at Jasmine. "You think this is intentional?" Jasmine nodded. "I do. And I think Calloway's behind it." Over the next few days, the two girls began digging deeper into the school's history. They combed through old news articles, public records, and online forums, piecing together a disturbing picture. They discovered that Lincoln High had a long, ugly history of racism. Decades ago, the school had been at the center of a desegregation battle, with white parents protesting violently against the integration of black students. Although the protest had died down over time, the animosity hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone underground. And then there was Calloway. Before becoming principal, he had been a history teacher at the school for over 20 years. During that time, he had gained a reputation for being strict, especially with black students. There were whispers among alumni about unfair expulsions, biased grading, and even physical altercations. But the most chilling discovery came late one night, when Jasmine stumbled across an old article in the archives of the local newspaper. It was about a group called the Lincoln Preservation Society, a so-called community organization that had been founded in the 1970s to protect local traditions. "Look at this," Jasmine said, shoving her laptop toward Kiera. She pointed to a grainy black and white photo of the group's members standing in front of a Confederate flag. Kiera's breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of the men in the photo. "That's Calloway," she whispered. The article didn't explicitly label the group as a white supremacist organization, but the coded language was clear. The Lincoln Preservation Society had been involved in several incidents of harassment and intimidation against black families in the area, including a firebombing at a church in the 1980s. Kiera leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "So you're saying Calloway's part of this group? That he's been using his position at the school to, punish black students?" Jasmine nodded grimly. "It all fits. Think about it. The yearbooks, the disciplinary records, the dress code nonsense. He's been doing this for years and no one stopped him because no one's been paying attention." Kiera felt a surge of anger and determination. "Well, we're paying attention now," she said. The next day, armed with their findings, Kiera and Jasmine began documenting everything. They took photos of the yearbooks, screenshots of the articles, and notes on everything they had uncovered. Jasmine even created an anonymous Instagram account to share their findings with the world. But the more they dug, the more they realized they were putting themselves in danger. It started with strange anonymous messages sent to Kiera's phone. "Stop asking questions," one text read. Another simply said, "You're making a mistake." Then there were the notes in her locker, slips of paper with chilling phrases like, "Stay in your place," and "You've been warned." One night, as Kiera was walking home from the library, she noticed a car following her. When she stopped, The car stopped. When she walked faster, it sped up. She ducked into an alley and hid behind a dumpster, her heart pounding as the car slowly rolled past. By the time she made it home, she was shaking. But she also knew one thing for certain. She couldn't back down now. The first threat came as a note in her locker. Kiera had just finished her morning chemistry class when she spun the combination lock and opened the small metal door. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual. Her books were stacked the way she'd left them, her pencil pouch neatly tucked into the corner. But then her eyes landed on the folded piece of paper sitting on top of her notebook. Frowning, she picked it up and unfolded it. The words, written in jagged black marker, were short but chilling. "Stay in your place." Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the note. The letters seemed to pulse on the page, their meaning sinking in with a nauseating weight. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching her, but the hallway was empty. "Kiera?" Jasmine's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned to see her friend approaching, her brow furrowed in concern. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, Kiera handed Jasmine the note. Jasmine's eyes widened as she read it, her jaw tightening. "Okay, this is officially getting scary," Jasmine said, her voice low. "Who do you think left this?" Kiera shook her head. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they know what we're doing." Jasmine's eyes darted around the hallway, as if searching for the culprit. "We need to be careful. If they think they can scare you, they'll try to stop you from digging any deeper." Kiera nodded, though the knot in her stomach only tightened. She had been prepared for pushback. She'd known from the start that exposing the truth about Calloway and the school's history wouldn't be easy. But this felt different. It wasn't just resistance. It was a warning. The notes kept coming over the next few days. Some were slipped into her locker. Others were shoved into her backpack or taped to her desk. Each one carried the same menacing tone. "You're making a mistake. This isn't your fight. Back off before it's too late." Then the text messages started. Kiera had no idea how they had gotten her number, but the messages were relentless. At first they were vague, things like, "Stop what you're doing," or "You've been warned." But as the days went on, they became more specific, more personal. One message read, "We know where you live." Another said, "Your family can't protect you." Kiera's hands trembled as she read the words, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to tell herself it was just a bluff, an empty threat meant to scare her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. The breaking point came one evening as she was walking home from the library. The sun had already set, and the streets were quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Kiera clutched her bag tightly, her thoughts racing as she replayed everything she and Jasmine had uncovered. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the car at first. It wasn't until she turned onto a side street that she heard the faint rumble of an engine behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a black sedan creeping along the curb, its headlights off. Her pulse quickened. She picked up her pace, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. The car sped up to match her, its tires crunching softly against the asphalt. Panic set in. Kiera turned sharply down an alley, her heart pounding as she ducked between two dumpsters. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The car rolled past the alley, its windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. She waited until the sound of the engine faded into the distance before stepping out of her hiding spot. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and called Jasmine. "I'm done," Kiera said as soon as Jasmine picked up. "I can't do this anymore. Someone followed me. Someone in a car. They know what we're doing and they're trying to scare me. It's working." "Kiera, listen to me," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the panic she must have been feeling. "You can't stop now. That's exactly what they want. If you back down, they win. And think about all the people who've been hurt because of this. You're doing this for them too." Kiera closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wanted to believe Jasmine was right, that standing up to Calloway and his enablers was worth the risk. But in that moment, all she could feel was fear. Kiera stood in front of the heavy, rusted door at the end of the school's basement hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. The air smelled stale and metallic, and the dim light overhead flickered erratically, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. "Are you sure about this?" Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced over her shoulder. "No," Kiera admitted, gripping the flashlight tighter in her hand. "But it's now or never." Jasmine nodded, her jaw set with determination. Okay, let's do this. The two girls had spent the past week gathering everything they could about the school's history, but they knew they were still missing key pieces of the puzzle. Then, earlier that day, Jasmine had overheard two teachers in the staff lounge talking about an old storage room in the basement, one that had been locked up for years. It was a long shot, but if there was any chance the room held the answers they were looking for, Kiera knew they had to take it. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. It didn't budge. Locked, she muttered. Of course it is, Jasmine said, rolling her eyes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a hairpin. Good thing I came prepared. Kiera watched in amazement as Jasmine crouched in front of the lock, her hands working quickly and confidently. Within seconds, there was a soft click, and the door creaked open. Remind me to never trust you around my diary, Kiera said, attempting a weak smile. Jasmine smirked. You don't have a diary, nerd. Now come on. The room was dark, the only light coming from Kiera's flashlight as she swept it across the space. It was filled with old filing cabinets, boxes stacked precariously on top of one another, and shelves lined with dusty binders. Jackpot, Jasmine said, stepping inside. Kiera followed, her flashlight beam landing on a cabinet labeled Disciplinary Records, 1980s. She pulled open the drawer, coughing as a cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside were dozens of manila folders, each one bearing the name of a former student. Look at this, Kiera said, holding up a folder. She flipped it open, her stomach turning as she read the contents. It's a suspension notice. Disruptive behavior in class. But listen to this. Student raised concerns about racial inequalities in school policies. Seriously? Jasmine said, leaning over her shoulder. They suspended someone for that? Kiera nodded, flipping through more records. The pattern was undeniable. Black students were being punished for speaking out, for challenging the status quo. And it wasn't just suspensions. There were expulsions, incidents of verbal and even physical abuse, all swept under the rug. But then she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a folder labeled with a name she recognized immediately. Jeremiah Williams. Her hands shook as she opened the file. Inside was a black and white photo of a young man with sharp features and piercing eyes. He was wearing a suit, his expression serious but defiant. Who's that? Jasmine asked, peeking over her shoulder. My grandfather, Kiera whispered. She skimmed the documents in the folder, her heart sinking with each word. Jeremiah Williams had been a teacher at Lincoln High in the 1960s, one of the first black educators hired after desegregation. According to the records, he had been fired after organizing a protest against the school's discriminatory policies. But it wasn't just his termination that caught Kiera's attention. There was a letter tucked into the folder, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. It was addressed to the school board and described how Jeremiah had received death threats after the protest, threats that had forced him and his family to flee the town in the middle of the night. Kiera's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She had always known her grandfather was a strong, principled man, but he had never talked about what had happened at Lincoln High. Now she understood why. Kiera, Jasmine said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry. Kiera shook her head, wiping her eyes. No, this is good. This is what we needed. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the documents, determined to preserve every detail. As they continued searching the room, Jasmine found an old, leather-bound journal tucked into one of the boxes. She flipped through its pages, her eyes widening. Kiera, look at this, she said, holding it up. It's a logbook. It lists all the students who've been expelled over the years, along with the reasons why. Kiera scanned the pages, her anger growing with each entry. The reasons were vague and arbitrary: failure to comply, insubordination, inappropriate behavior. But one thing was clear: the overwhelming majority of the names belonged to black students. This is it, Kiera said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and determination. This is the proof we need. They've been targeting us for decades and no one's done anything about it. Jasmine nodded. We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. They can't hide this anymore. But as they left the basement that night, their arms full of evidence, Kiera couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The night of the dance arrived and the atmosphere around Lincoln High was electric. The gymnasium had been transformed into a glittering wonderland of string lights, balloons, and shimmering decorations. Students streamed in, laughing and posing for photos, their faces glowing with excitement. But for Kiera Williams, the night wasn't about celebration. It was about making a statement. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress she had saved for. It fit her perfectly, just as it had the night she'd first tried it on. But tonight, the dress wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of defiance, of courage, of everything she refused to let them take from her. "You sure about this?" Jasmine asked from the doorway. She was already dressed for the dance in a sleek silver gown, her hair styled in perfect waves. Kiera turned to her best friend, her heart pounding in her chest. "No," she admitted, "but I have to do it. If I don't, they win." Jasmine nodded, a proud smile tugging at her lips. "Then let's go show them who they're messing with." The two girls arrived at the gym just as the dance was getting into full swing. The music was loud, the bass reverberating through the floor, and the room was packed with students swaying and laughing under the twinkling lights. As Kiera stepped through the doors, conversations hushed and heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave, and Kiera could feel hundreds of eyes on her. Some of the students looked shocked, others looked impressed, but a few, mostly the ones clustered around Haley Green and her clique, looked downright furious. "Look who decided to show up," Haley sneered, eyeing Kiera's dress with barely disguised disdain. "Guess someone didn't get the memo." Kiera ignored her, holding her head high as she walked further into the room. She could feel the weight of their stares, but she refused to let it drag her down. "Miss Williams." The voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned to see Principal Calloway standing at the edge of the dance floor, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was as cold and unyielding as ever, but there was something else in his eyes now, something darker. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but laced with anger. "I came to dance," Kiera said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling in her chest. "Just like everyone else." "You were told you're not allowed to attend," Calloway said, stepping closer. "You're violating school policy." "No, I'm not," Kiera said, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "I didn't break any rules, and you know it." For a moment, Calloway said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, the music and chatter fading into the background as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. Then, without warning, the lights went out. The gym was plunged into darkness, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. For a moment, everything was silent except for the faint hum of the speakers. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps, multiple pairs, approaching fast. "Kiera, run!" Jasmine shouted, grabbing her arm. But before they could move, rough hands grabbed Kiera from behind, yanking her backward. She screamed, struggling against her attackers, but they were too strong. "Kiera!" Jasmine's voice was panicked, but Kiera couldn't see her in the darkness. The hands dragged her toward the gym doors, and for a moment sheer terror consumed her. But then she remembered the phone in her clutch. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking as she hit the record button and pointed it toward her attackers. The phone's flashlight illuminated their faces, and Kiera felt a jolt of shock and fury. It wasn't just random students. It was adults, men she recognized from the Lincoln Preservation Society photos. And at the center of them, directing the chaos, was Principal Calloway. "Get that phone," Calloway barked, his voice harsh and commanding. But Kiera was faster. She twisted out of their grasp and bolted toward the stage, where the DJ was frantically trying to restore power. She climbed up onto the platform, her voice shaking but loud enough to carry over the commotion. "Everyone, listen to me," she shouted, holding up her phone. The flashlight beam swept across the crowd, illuminating their confused, frightened faces. "These people don't want you to know the truth. They've been silencing us for years, punishing us, expelling us, and worse. But I have proof, and I'm not afraid to show it." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and then the lights flickered back on. The gym was suddenly bathed in harsh fluorescent light, and everyone could see the men standing near the doors, their faces pale and furious. The crowd erupted into chaos. Students pulled out their phones, recording the scene as Calloway and his accomplices tried to retreat. But it was too late. Kiera had exposed them, and there was no going back. The video went viral within hours. By the time Kiera got home that night, her phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. Students had posted clips of her speech, the confrontation with Principal Calloway, and the men from the Lincoln Preservation Society standing frozen in the gym, their faces caught in the harsh glare of her flashlight. The hashtags, like Justice at Lincoln and I'd stand with Kiera, were trending by morning. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Parents, alumni, and local activists flooded the school board with demands for answers. News outlets picked up the story, replaying the footage of Kiera's stand on the stage, her voice steady and fearless as she exposed the truth. Principal Calloway was the first to go. The school board announced his resignation within days, though Kiera suspected he hadn't left willingly. It was clear from the way he glared at her during his final press conference that he blamed her for everything. But Kiera didn't care. For the first time in her life, she felt powerful, like her voice had finally been heard. The men from the Lincoln Preservation Society didn't fare much better. The photos and videos linking them to the attack on Kiera were damning, and the police launched an investigation into their activities. Within weeks, several of them were arrested on charges ranging from harassment to conspiracy. But the most significant change came from within the school itself. The students, inspired by Kiera's courage, began organizing. Jasmine led the charge, helping to form a new student coalition dedicated to promoting racial equity and holding the administration accountable. They called themselves the Unity Alliance, and their first order of business was demanding a review of the school's disciplinary policies. Kiera was reluctant to take on a leadership role at first. After everything that had happened, she was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. But Jasmine wouldn't let her fade into the background. "You started this," Jasmine said one afternoon as they sat together in the library. "You're the reason all of this is happening. People are listening now, Kiera. They believe in you." Kiera sighed, running a hand through her curls. "I didn't do it for the attention," she said. "I just wanted to make things right." "And you did," Jasmine replied. "But we still have a long way to go. And we need you." In the weeks that followed, Kiera found herself stepping into a role she hadn't expected, that of a leader. She spoke at school board meetings, sharing the evidence she and Jasmine had uncovered in the basement. She worked with the Unity Alliance to draft proposals for change, including mandatory diversity training for staff and a more transparent system for handling disciplinary actions. It wasn't easy. There were still people, students, teachers, even parents, who resented her for what she had done. She overheard their whispers in the hallways, saw the glares they shot her during assemblies. But for every person who tried to tear her down, there were 10 more who lifted her up. One afternoon, as she was walking to class, a younger student stopped her in the hallway. "Hey, Kiera," the girl said shyly, clutching her books to her chest. "Hi," Kiera replied, smiling. "What's up?" I wanted to say thank you. For everything. It means a lot to see someone like you stand up for us." Kiera felt a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Moments like that reminded her why she had fought so hard. It wasn't just about her. It was about all the students who had been silenced, overlooked, or unfairly punished. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what she had endured. As the school year drew to a close, Kiera stood on the auditorium stage once again, this time as the keynote speaker at the senior awards ceremony. She wore her emerald green dress, the same one she had worn on the night of the dance. It had become a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and her refusal to back down. "Standing up for what's right isn't easy," she said, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the crowd. "It takes courage, and it takes sacrifice. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that change doesn't happen unless we demand it. We can't be afraid to speak up, even when it feels like the world is against us. Because when we stand together, we're unstoppable." The applause that followed was deafening. Kiera looked out at the audience, at the faces of her classmates, her teachers, and her family, and felt a surge of pride. She hadn't just survived, she had thrived. After the ceremony, she found herself standing alone in the hallway, gazing at the rows of lockers. For so long, this school had been a place of struggle and pain for her. But now, it felt different. It felt like a place where she had made her mark, where she had left something behind that would outlast her. "Ready to go?" Jasmine's voice broke through her thoughts. Kiera turned to see her best friend smiling at her, a proud gleam in her eyes. "Yeah," Kiera said, returning the smile. "Let's go." As they walked out of the building together, Kiera felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The fight wasn't over. There was still so much work to be done. But for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone, and that was more than enough.